When you live alone after 60, clutter stops being about storage, it starts being about stories. Every folded letter, every chipped mug, every shelf filled with someday things holds a whisper of who you used to be. And it's strange, when the house gets quieter, the memories get louder. You start realizing that some of the hardest things to let go of aren't even valuable, they are just familiar. They remind you of a version of yourself you don't want to lose. But here's the truth most people never say: decluttering isn't really about throwing things away. It's about learning what still deserves space in your life, and what's quietly been holding you back. It's about peace, not perfection. And when you start seeing it that way, every drawer becomes a doorway back to clarity. Before we go on, if this already feels familiar, hit like and that new hype button. It helps bring this message to more seniors finding peace in their next chapter. Merelda Crane is 68, a retired librarian from a quiet town in North Carolina. To anyone who visits, her home looks neat, the kind of place where the books are alphabetized, the teacups match their sources, and the curtains are always drawn just right. But behind that calm order, Merelda carries the silent chaos that only someone who's lived a full, complicated life can understand. Her husband passed away 3 years ago. Her children live hours away, visiting on holidays when schedules allow. And though her home feels safe, lately it's also started to feel crowded, not with people, but with memories. Every shelf, every box in the attic, every closet packed to the brim tells a story she hasn't had the courage to reread. For decades, Merelda believed organization was control. If everything had a place, maybe her emotions would too. But when she began living alone, something shifted. She noticed how often she opened a drawer and felt a wave of sadness instead of satisfaction. The order she'd built had become a maze of the past: ticket stubs, faded recipes, a dozen mugs she never used but couldn't seem to give away. One afternoon, while dusting the same photo frame for the 100th time, it hit her: she wasn't curating her life anymore, she was clinging to it. That realization marked the beginning of something new, a journey she never expected at her age. Decluttering stopped being about tidying. It became a kind of quiet therapy, one that forced her to ask, what still brings me joy, and what just brings me back? Merelda began to see that clearing her home wasn't an act of loss, it was an act of self-respect. Each item she released gave her space to breathe again, to read again, to dream again. Merelda's story isn't about minimalism. It's about emotional courage, about finding balance between holding on to love and making room for life to continue. Living alone after 60 can feel like stepping into a different kind of silence, one that doesn't just fill the room but echoes through your thoughts. For years, Merelda thought she was managing fine. She read her books, made her tea, and kept her space immaculate. But one day, she noticed something unsettling. Her home wasn't comforting her anymore. It was haunting her. Every drawer whispered, every corner carried a face, a voice, or a version of herself that no longer existed. That's when she realized the hardest part of aging alone isn't loneliness, it's learning to live with everything that stayed behind. When we finally have time to sit still, the clutter we once ignored begins to speak. A faded birthday card, a chipped ornament, an old jacket still hanging by the door, they become emotional time machines, pulling us into moments we haven't fully released. And here's the truth: many seniors avoid decluttering not because it's tiring, but because it's confronting. It's easier to dust the past than to decide what deserves to remain in the present. Merelda learned that decluttering, when you live alone, is not about making space for visitors, it's about making peace with yourself. It's a gentle unraveling of attachment, guilt, and identity. It's realizing that letting go of certain things doesn't mean forgetting, but forgiving. Forgiving yourself for moving on, for surviving, for needing something new. And that's where the quiet lesson lies: our homes mirror our emotional state. When the space feels heavy, it's often because the heart is too. By clearing what no longer speaks to your soul, you invite clarity, and with it, peace. So as Merelda begins this journey, she invites others to join her, not in throwing things away recklessly, but in rediscovering what truly matters. Because decluttering isn't just about what leaves the house. It's about what stays, and why. With that in mind, she begins her first small, powerful step. Tip 1. Clutter is time, frozen in place. When Merelda first opened the cedar chest at the foot of her bed, she didn't see blankets, she saw entire seasons of her life folded between them. The sweater her late husband wore every autumn. The postcards her sister sent before her eyesight began to fail. The knitting project she promised she'd finish someday. In that moment, she realized something quietly profound. Clutter isn't just stuff, it's time, frozen in place. For many seniors living alone, clutter becomes a map of where life paused. Each object holds a timestamp, the day you stopped hosting family dinners, the month you retired, the year someone stopped calling. We don't mean to collect clutter, we collect moments we were afraid to lose. That's why decluttering after 60 feels so emotional. It's not about tidying, it's about acknowledging what shaped you, what stayed too long, and what never truly left. Merelda didn't rush. She sat with each item like an old friend, asking quiet questions. Do I still need this to remember? Or have I already carried the memory long enough? This gentle conversation between past and present is the real work of decluttering. Because when you live alone, there's no one to distract you from your own history, and that's both the challenge and the gift. The frozen time in our homes reflects the places we stopped growing emotionally. But thawing it, piece by piece, lets life flow again. Maybe that means donating the books you once loved but will never reread, or finally recycling the recipe cards for dinners you no longer cook. You're not erasing your story, you're editing it for the next chapter. And here's the beautiful irony. Once Merelda began letting go, her space didn't feel emptier, it felt alive again. The air moved differently. The silence softened. Because time, once unfrozen, doesn't disappear, it transforms into freedom. And that's where her next discovery begins. Tip 2. The air changes when you let go. The first night after Merelda cleared her guest room, she stood in the doorway and felt something she couldn't quite name. The air seemed to move differently, softer, warmer, lighter. It wasn't just the absence of boxes or stacked photo albums. It was the absence of tension. For the first time in years, her home felt like it had taken a deep breath. And so had she. When you live alone, your home mirrors your emotional state. Clutter quietly absorbs old energy, grief, hesitation, even guilt. It hangs heavy in the corners and lingers in rooms you no longer use. But when you begin to release those layers, something unseen shifts. The stillness becomes calm instead of lonely. The air itself feels renewed, almost sacred, like the house has been waiting for you to notice it again. Scientists might call it psychology. But seniors who've lived through decades of change know, it's spiritual, too. Every time you give away something that served its purpose, you invite life to flow where stagnation used to sit. You're telling your home, I'm still here. I'm still growing. Merelda noticed how her breathing changed, slower, deeper. The morning light suddenly reached farther into the room. Even the creaks in the floor sounded friendlier, like the house was waking up after a long sleep. And that's when it hit her, decluttering isn't about organizing space, it's about clearing emotional airways. You don't just remove objects, you release weight you didn't know you were carrying. If you've ever felt suffocated by your own memories, this is where peace begins. Open a window after you declutter. Stand in that clean space and breathe, not out of habit, but with intention. You'll notice something miraculous. The air feels alive because it's now moving with you, not against you. And as Merelda soon discovered, once the air shifts, everything else follows, including the way you see yourself. Which leads perfectly to what she uncovered next. Tip 3. The things that guilt you most usually matter least. Merelda stared at a silver bread maker still sealed in its box. She had bought it 5 years ago, convinced she'd master the art of homemade loaves once retirement slowed her days. But every time she saw that untouched box, she felt the same quiet stab, not of waste, but of guilt. It wasn't just about the money, it was about the silent expectation that she'd become a different kind of person. One who baked on Sundays. One who entertained. One who didn't eat toast over the sink. For seniors, guilt clutter is the most deceptive kind. It hides behind good intentions, the expensive gadget you never used, the clothes that never quite fit, the unopened craft supplies meant for a someday that never came. Each item carries a whisper of self-judgment, I should have. I still might. I used to. But here's the truth Merelda had to learn: guilt is not gratitude. Keeping something because you feel bad about it is not the same as appreciating its value. When you live alone, those guilt objects take up more than shelf space. They take up emotional oxygen. They remind you of things you didn't do instead of honoring what you already have done. Every time Merelda walked past that bread maker, it wasn't just a kitchen appliance, it was a silent critic. The day she finally donated it to the community center, she didn't feel shame, she felt relief. It was as though she traded regret for grace. Decluttering guilt means forgiving yourself for being human. You don't owe your possessions redemption. You owe yourself peace. If an item makes you feel smaller, it doesn't belong in your next chapter. True gratitude isn't keeping everything, it's keeping what still adds light. And when Merelda realized that, her home began to shift again. She wasn't surrounded by reminders of what she hadn't done, but by proof of what she had lived through. And that lesson, that release, led her to the next turning point. Tip 4. Some things deserve a ceremony, not a shelf. The day Merelda decided to part with her late husband's old camera, she didn't just drop it into a donation box. She brewed a cup of tea, opened the blinds to let the afternoon sun spill in, and sat with it one last time. She traced her fingers over the worn leather strap, remembered the way he used to squint through the viewfinder, and whispered a quiet thank you. Then, she took one final photo, not of a person, but of the camera itself, before letting it go. It wasn't disposal, it was closure. When you live alone, letting go of sentimental things can feel like erasing evidence that someone or something mattered. That's why creating a small ritual can transform loss into honor. It could be as simple as lighting a candle, writing down a memory, or playing a favorite song as you say goodbye. These moments turn the act of decluttering into a ceremony, a way to acknowledge love without being imprisoned by it. Seniors often carry decades of layered meaning in their belongings: the wedding china used twice, the coat that still smells faintly of winter trips, the letters from friends long gone. These aren't just objects, they are touchstones of identity. But when the shelf becomes a shrine, the weight shifts from remembrance to resistance. You start living for the past instead of alongside it. Merelda realized that what she needed wasn't a shelf full of relics, it was a moment to say, "Thank you for everything you gave me. I can carry your memory now, not your material." And the beauty of this approach is how freeing it feels. You don't erase the love, you give it a moment worthy of its meaning. A photograph, a story recorded for your children, a journal entry, these become modern altars to memory, not prisons for it. As Merelda stood in that sunlit room, she noticed the space where the camera once sat wasn't empty. It felt sacred, like love had been transformed into light. And with that peace, she was finally ready to face something harder. Tip 5. Loneliness hides in stacks. When Merelda began clearing the piles of magazines by her armchair, she realized something uncomfortable: those stacks weren't just clutter. They were company. Each glossy cover had kept her from noticing the silence that fell at 6 p.m., when the phone stopped ringing and the world outside her window dimmed to gray. Those piles filled a space that used to be occupied by laughter, footsteps, and voices that no longer echoed through her home. For many seniors, clutter becomes a quiet stand-in for companionship. We hold on to stacks, books, papers, trinkets, half-finished projects, because they fill emotional gaps. They make a room feel full when our lives feel smaller. It's not laziness, it's longing. Every item represents continuity, proof that something is still happening. But what Merelda discovered was simple and painful. When you start clearing those stacks, the emptiness they've been protecting finally comes into view. And that's where healing begins. Decluttering loneliness isn't about getting rid of things, it's about acknowledging why we needed them. Merelda noticed that the emptier her table became, the more she reached for her phone, not to scroll, but to call someone. A friend from the library. Her niece in Atlanta. Even a neighbor she'd never really spoken to. It wasn't clutter she missed, it was connection. That's the deeper truth. Every cleared surface asks a question. What kind of closeness do you truly crave now? Maybe it's conversation, shared meals, or joining a group that meets at the park. Clearing space doesn't isolate you, it reveals where you're ready to invite life back in. By the time Merelda finished, her home didn't feel lonely, it felt open, ready. Because she finally understood that stacks can't hold hands, paper can't listen, and objects can't replace affection. The room was lighter, but her heart was heavier, in a good way. She was finally feeling again. And that awakening led her straight to tip 6. Tip 6. You don't need to downsize, you need to right-size. When Merelda first told her daughter she was decluttering, the younger woman gasped, "Mom, are you thinking of downsizing?" Merelda laughed softly and said, "No, dear, I'm just trying to make my space fit me again." That single line captures the shift many seniors never realize they're allowed to make. Decluttering isn't about moving into less, it's about creating room that reflects who you are now, not who you were decades ago. Downsizing often feels like loss, smaller home, fewer things, diminished life. But right-sizing is empowering. It's about proportion, not reduction. It's about choosing what fits your current rhythm instead of forcing your present to live inside your past. At 68, Merelda no longer needed a dining table that sat 8, but she did need a cozy reading nook bathed in afternoon light. She didn't need 5 sets of linens, but she wanted one that made her mornings feel fresh and beautiful. For many older adults, the idea of letting go feels like giving up. But it's the opposite. Right-sizing gives your environment a chance to evolve alongside you. The things that once made sense, the heavy furniture, the crowded closets, the boxes of just in case, were perfect for earlier versions of your life. But your needs have changed, and so has your joy. The question isn't, what can I live without? It's, what truly supports the life I want to live now? Merelda discovered that once she right-sized her space, she began to move through her home differently, slower, steadier, more grounded. She stopped tripping over yesterday's purpose and started walking freely into today's peace. For seniors across the US, especially those adjusting to retirement or solo living, this mindset shift is life-changing. You don't have to shrink to stay independent, you simply have to make space that celebrates your stage of life. Because right-sizing isn't about having less, it's about finally having enough. And that realization opened the door, both literally and emotionally, to what came next. Tip 7. The future deserves space too. When Merelda cleared the last of the old boxes from her hallway, she paused, broom in hand, and looked at the open corner by the window. 4 years, it had been buried under a tower of Sunday, sewing supplies, holiday wrapping paper, even a stack of plastic bins filled with things she didn't quite remember. Now, all that remained was sunlight pooling on the hardwood floor. It felt almost foreign, that much space. Her first instinct was to fill it again, maybe a small chair, maybe a plant. But then she stopped. For the first time, she realized something powerful. Not every corner needs a purpose from the past. Some spaces are meant for the future. Many seniors equate empty space with loss, as though a bare shelf or quiet room means something is missing. But what if emptiness isn't an absence? What if it's a promise? When you live alone after 60, leaving room open is an act of faith. Faith that life isn't finished giving, that new experiences can still arrive, that joy can still surprise you. Merelda began calling that sunlit corner her possibility space. It reminded her that freedom doesn't come from what you keep, it comes from what you make space for. Maybe it's a new hobby, a future visitor, or simply a place for morning light to dance without interruption. The future deserves somewhere to land, and that means not every inch of your home needs a memory attached to it. Psychologists say visual openness helps calm the mind, but for seniors, it does more than that. It rekindles hope. It tells your heart, there's still room for tomorrow. When Merelda walked past that corner weeks later, she noticed something unexpected. She didn't see emptiness anymore. She saw potential, quiet, patient, beautiful potential. Decluttering, at its core, isn't just about letting go of what was, it's about making room for what could be. And that gentle realization carried her into one of the most surprising truths of all. Tip 8. Your energy is a room, too. As Merelda moved through her newly cleared home, she began to notice something subtle yet undeniable. She felt lighter. Not just physically, but mentally. The fog that had hovered over her mornings began to lift. She found herself remembering names faster, reading longer without distraction, even humming while she cooked. That's when she understood a truth she'd never read in any organizing book. Your energy is a room, too. And just like any room, it can become cluttered. For seniors living alone, it's easy for the mind to fill with leftover noise, worry about health, memories that replay too often, guilt about slowing down, fears about what's next. Over time, this emotional clutter becomes invisible furniture, taking up space inside you. The more crowded your inner world becomes, the less room you have for peace. Decluttering your environment isn't just about appearance, it's about alignment. When your surroundings simplify, your energy finds a rhythm again. Merelda noticed this connection every time she walked into her kitchen. When it was clean, she breathed deeper, moved slower, cooked with intention. When it wasn't, she felt scattered, restless, even short-tempered. The space outside mirrored the space within. So she began a ritual. Every evening, she'd tidy for 10 minutes, not for order, but for balance. That small act reset her energy like a quiet meditation. Modern studies now affirm what older wisdom has always known: the mind and the home are twins. One reflects the state of the other. Seniors who declutter often report clearer thinking, better sleep, and even reduced stress hormones. It's not magic, it's alignment. So if your thoughts feel tangled, look around you. The pile on the counter might be more than papers. It could be a reflection of unresolved decisions. Clearing space outside invites stillness inside. By the time Merelda embraced this truth, she didn't just have a cleaner home, she had reclaimed her calm. And that serenity led her to a profound discovery about control and acceptance. Tip 9. Some memories grow stronger once freed. When Merelda decided to give away her mother's porcelain teacups, she braced herself for heartbreak. Those cups had followed her through 5 moves and 50 years. Every time she saw them, she pictured her mother's hands, graceful, careful, steady, pouring tea on Sunday afternoons. But when she finally packed them for donation, something unexpected happened. The image of her mother didn't fade. It grew clearer. It wasn't attached to the porcelain anymore, it was alive in her. This is the paradox of letting go. We think the memory will vanish with the object, when in truth, it often deepens. The mind doesn't need proof to remember love, it only needs permission to feel it fully. For seniors, especially those living alone, objects can become emotional anchors. We hold on because we're afraid that once we release the physical, the person, the moment, or the meaning will disappear. But what actually happens is the opposite. Space allows memory to breathe, to stretch, to expand beyond its container. When Merelda released those teacups, she began remembering things she hadn't in years. Her mother's laugh when the kettle whistled too loud, the lilac scent that lingered on her sweater, the warmth of her hand on cold mornings. It was as if the memory, no longer trapped in an object, began living freely again. The love was still there, only now, it wasn't fragile. It didn't need protection from dust or time. Many older adults discover this after decluttering, that emotional attachment doesn't die with the donation. It transforms. You can love someone deeply without keeping everything they touched. You can honor the past without being confined by it. The memory isn't in the thing, it's in the feeling that thing once sparked. As Merelda sipped her tea that evening, from a simple mug she'd bought herself, she smiled. Her mother was still there, not on a shelf, but in her spirit. And with that, she understood the heart of renewal, the lesson that unfolds next in Tip 10. Tip 10. Clutter isn't a mess, it's a language. The day Merelda finally faced the hallway closet, the one she'd avoided for months, she expected chaos. What she didn't expect was conversation. As she opened the door, each item seemed to whisper something. The half-used craft supplies said hope, the stack of old calendars murmured routine, and the broken umbrella sighed just in case. It was in that moment she realized clutter wasn't a mess, it was a language. Every pile, every drawer, every untouched corner was saying something about what she valued, feared, or still longed for. For seniors living alone, clutter often speaks louder than words. It tells stories we've stopped telling out loud, about security, identity, and loss. That pile of unpaid bills might say, "I'm overwhelmed." The closet bursting with clothes from another decade might whisper, "I miss who I was." And the drawer full of birthday cards? That's not disorganization, it's affection preserved. The problem isn't the stuff itself, it's that we've forgotten how to listen. When Merelda began to translate her clutter, everything changed. She stopped feeling guilty about it and started getting curious. Why am I keeping this? What is it trying to tell me? Sometimes the answer surprised her. A pile wasn't laziness, it was fatigue. The messy drawer wasn't neglect, it was comfort. Once she understood the emotional dialect of her space, letting go became an act of understanding, not punishment. Clutter is emotional shorthand. It doesn't mean failure, it means feeling. And for seniors, that's an incredibly human thing. But here's the freedom in it. Once you can read the language, you can rewrite the story. You can keep what speaks truth and release what only echoes fear. When Merelda finished that closet, it wasn't empty, it was honest. She hadn't just decluttered her home, she translated her heart. And that emotional fluency, that new way of seeing her space, brought her to the next profound realization. Tip 11. The new kind of abundance. When Merelda finished clearing her kitchen drawers, she stood in front of them and laughed. Not because of what she found, but because of what she didn't. For the first time in years, she could see every utensil she actually used. No duplicates, no broken gadgets, no maybe one-day clutter. Just what mattered. The drawer looked simple, but the feeling it gave her was extraordinary. It was abundance, not in quantity, but in clarity. As seniors, many of us grew up believing abundance meant more. More furniture, more storage, more evidence of stability. But after 60, that definition quietly shifts. Real abundance is measured not in possessions, but in freedom, in how easily you can move through your home, your day, and your thoughts. Having fewer things doesn't strip your life, it reveals it. You start to notice how much you already have: time to rest, clarity to choose, peace to breathe, and the precious ability to decide what truly matters now. Merelda realized this on a quiet Tuesday morning when she sat at her clean dining table with a cup of coffee. She noticed how light filled the room, how her shoulders had stopped tensing, how she could finally see the grain of the wood again. It wasn't emptiness that comforted her, it was space. Space to think. Space to be. The less she owned, the more she experienced. For many older adults, this new kind of abundance comes as a revelation. You stop chasing fullness and start cultivating focus. You no longer measure your worth by what you keep, but by how calmly you can live. It's abundance that doesn't need proof, it's felt, not displayed. And the unexpected gift? With less to maintain, you gain back hours that belong to you. Time to read, to walk, to connect, to simply exist. When Merelda embraced this truth, she no longer feared having less. She saw that real wealth is peace that can't be boxed or broken. And that newfound richness prepared her for the final, most transformative truth. Tip 12. Home becomes present tense again. When Merelda Crane finally cleared the last box, something unexpected happened. The house stopped echoing. For the first time in years, it didn't sound empty, it sounded awake. She realized that clutter hadn't just filled her shelves, it had been filling the silence between who she was and who she was becoming. Now, each room carried a quiet hum, like it was exhaling after holding its breath for too long. For many seniors living alone, this is the turning point. You stop living around your past and start living within your present. You notice how the morning light hits your favorite chair, how the air moves differently when the windows aren't blocked by things you no longer need. It's not just a visual shift, it's emotional oxygen. Decluttering wasn't about loss for Merelda, it was about arrival. Every object released made space for something weightless: peace, purpose, possibility. Her home no longer whispered stories of what used to be, it spoke softly of what's still unfolding. That's the real secret: when the past no longer takes up space, life finally has room to visit again. By the end, Merelda Crane's home doesn't gleam with the cold perfection of minimalism, it breathes. There's a rhythm again. Sunlight drapes across her reading chair, a vase of fresh flowers replaces the stacks of forgotten papers, and laughter, genuine, unforced laughter, spills through the hallway when her grandkids visit on weekends. The space isn't empty, it's alive. Every cleared shelf became a stage for connection, every open space an invitation for new memories to form. She didn't declutter to escape the past but to make peace with it. Each decision to let go, an old scarf, a chipped mug, a drawer of fading letters, became a gentle homecoming to herself. And in that stillness, she discovered something she hadn't expected. Joy doesn't need clutter to feel close. It thrives in calm, in clarity, in knowing what truly matters today. Merelda finally understands that decluttering was never subtraction. It was restoration. Every item released gave back something she didn't know she'd lost: laughter, movement, and the quiet ease of belonging again. Her home, once a gallery of memories, is now a living portrait of the woman she has become, lighter, freer, and beautifully present. In the end, she doesn't walk through an empty house, she walks through a new chapter. One where love echoes louder than possessions, and peace finally takes up the space it always deserved. Decluttering alone isn't an ending, it's a conversation between who you were and who you're still becoming. That's the truth Merelda Crane came to understand, and it's the quiet revelation every senior living alone eventually meets. You're not erasing your story when you let go of things, you're allowing it to keep unfolding. Every drawer you open, every object you decide to part with, becomes a small act of courage. It says, I'm still here. I'm still growing. I still have space for what's next. For seniors across the United States, this message resonates deeply because this season of life is about rediscovery, about learning that simplicity isn't loss, it's freedom. When you create space, you create breath, for new friends, new joys, and even new love. You learn that your home, much like your heart, was never meant to be a storage room for old fears but a sanctuary for living, right now. So if this touched you, don't just scroll away. Don't just hype it. The new hype button is YouTube's way of letting seniors' voices rise to the top. Every hype helps another person over 60 rediscover calm, courage, and that gentle spark of purpose. Subscribe to Wise Aging Seniors, where every story reminds you that life doesn't shrink with age, it deepens. There's still room for laughter, for healing, for adventure, for second chances. Your next chapter doesn't begin with what you throw away, it begins with what you make room for.